Guess who just took the wheel? We did. The Stake F1 team era is here. Buckle up.
Welcome back to the Done Deal Show with myself, Terry Flewers, and Ben Jacob. Today, sponsored by Stake F1. And yes, that was Drake. That was Drake talking at the beginning of a Football Terrace video. So I'm feeling very impressed with myself today. Morning, Ben. How are you, my friend?
Yeah, good morning. Not sure I can follow Drake.
You might. It depends on the news. It depends on the news. And listen, Drake has never worn drip as nice as that jumper. I'm telling you that now for free. So I appreciate that. And look, a little bit more on Stake a bit later, but you can go check out their website, check out their announcement, as they are now officially taken over from Alfa Romeo as an F1 team. You can scan the QR code or click the link in our description below. I wanted to start off though today, Ben, with the big breaking news. Done deal. Henderson to Ajax. This kind of didn't come out of nowhere, but it's been big breaking news this morning. What's the latest in regards to that?
Yeah, first of all, apologies to the chat for my lateness. Part of that was down to the Jordan Henderson deal. And as you say, it's almost done with Ajax. The way that this has actually come about is that Henderson's self-representing. So when he moved to Al Ittifaq, Trent Alexander-Arnold's brother Tyler did that deal. For this particular bit of business, Henderson is out there, not entirely by himself because he's got advisors, but ultimately he's self-representing. And that has allowed him to line up a deal first with Ajax and then go to Al Ittifaq. And he wanted to do it that way, almost for some kind of deniability, because when the news came out there that he wanted to leave, Henderson knew that he had to have something concrete to bring back to Al Ittifaq. Otherwise, there was always a danger that he showed his hand and still stayed at the club. So Al Ittifaq had known for probably the last 10 days that Jordan Henderson was considering an exit, but they'd not been told directly. And that was the key step, as I reported exclusively a few days ago. Henderson was due back in Abu Dhabi. And even though it was only for a few days, he had to go there. And it's Abu Dhabi because it's a mid-season training camp, because Ittifaq don't have a game until the middle of February. So Henderson met Steven Gerrard and the sporting director, Mark Allen, and he told them on Monday that he was exploring options. And at that point still, Ittifaq said that they didn't want to loan him or sell him and that they hadn't had any approaches or even inquiries. Henderson then said that if something couldn't be reached, he would consider going public and confirming that he wanted to leave Saudi Arabia. And then it got a little bit difficult because Ittifaq responded, stating very clearly that if he went public, it didn't matter what he lined up, nothing would be sanctioned. And I would say it was relatively tense on that Monday evening into Tuesday morning. Then there was a second meeting. And then finally, the club president, Samit Al-Mishal, got involved, and it was much more amicable. And it was stated that if Henderson had lined up Ajax on his side, even though Ittifaq hadn't received any form of offer, they would be prepared to entertain with Henderson a termination of contract. And that is being finalised now. And ultimately, there's a saving for Ittifaq on the wages. They're not as high as many report, but it's still 8 million net a year. So there's a saving of the second half of the wages, which free up funds. But Henderson is also contributing. And this is where legally it's quite interesting, because we would associate an add-on with a club-to-club negotiation. But if everything goes according to plan with the finalisation at Ajax, and then Henderson succeeds under certain circumstances, he'll owe Ittifaq a form almost of bonus, which means that the total contribution from Henderson is going to be quite costly, because in addition to that, by not staying 2 years, he also has to pay taxes as well. So his Ajax contract is expected to be 1.5 years, possibly with an option. The wage at Ajax will be roughly a 75% pay cut. And that's based upon taking the 8 million number of wages down to total possible earnings at Ajax of about 2 million, give or take. And obviously both in this context are then taxed, because the 8 million part months, of which he's already earned, will now have to be declared. So it's not like he just pockets tax-free money for 6 months. He now has to pay back certain things. Sources in Saudi indicate he won't have to pay things back like a sign-on fee or a relocation or anything like that. But that can actually be quite typical in Saudi Arabia under normal employment. When you only stay for 6 months, you often have to give a lot back that you're given up front, because they might pay for the housing, they might give you a relocation fee, even things like furniture allowance and stuff like that can be quite high numbers that you often have to return. None of that will happen with Henderson, but he'll still owe money back. And now he goes on to Ajax. And then I think we're going to see split narratives, because the Saudi side insist that he's happy in Saudi, and this is more about football and not playing until February and worrying that he won't make the Euro squad. And of course, you would expect them to say that. And obviously, from the Henderson side, it's clear that he hasn't fully settled. It's tough, though, because I lived out in the Middle East for the best part of 7 years. And I was in Saudi, I was in Qatar, I was in Bahrain, I was in the UAE. And it does take 6 months to get used to language, culture, climate. And when you're a footballer, it's more extreme, because you go from morning training to night training. His first 5 games were in 40-degree heat. So I think there's two sides to this. Now, Henderson will, to some extent, push the unhappy or unsettled in Saudi side. But what we, I think, need to add is that there will probably be I'm going to call it, gagging clause, although that's maybe not the right terminology or doesn't quite have the right tone to it. But there will be some kind of amicable agreement whereby I don't think Henderson will be allowed to come out and say that he didn't enjoy his time in Saudi Arabia. I also think, in fairness to Al Ittifaq, there needed to be more due diligence from Henderson, because it's a great club, genuinely, but it's not a big club. It's not one of the PIF controlled ones. So Henderson should have known the size of the stadium. He should have known the facility. Yes. He should have known the location. He should have known everything, because that's what you do when you take any job. And I don't think he did his due diligence. And the reason for that is because 4 days after he arrived, he was unhappy with the gym, but he should have known what the gym was like. And again, Al Ittifaq went out of their way to buy him a new gym. And when I say buy Henderson a new gym, the way the story is told is he literally sat with the club and said what equipment he wanted, and they pretty much ordered it on the spot. So I think Ittifaq have gone out of their way to try and make a success of it, but it just wasn't a fit for whatever reason, whether that's based on football, whether that's based on Euros, or, as many will suspect, because he took a large payday and didn't know what he was in for and didn't enjoy the experience. We're going to hear a range of different narratives, but the reality is the contract is terminated, and it looks like he's very close in the next few days to joining Ajax.
Yep, and look, I think whenever a league is not starting afresh, because it existed already, but the Saudi league is trying to go to another level, there's always going to be teething problems with some people. I think maybe thinking of the money before looking at the actual situation. We've seen it before in England when Sol Campbell joined Notts County. It didn't take him long to go, actually, I just don't want to sort of do this and be there. But look, he's going to join Ajax now. It looks pretty much like that's done, and we move on. Viewers, make sure like buttons have been hit. Any questions you've got for Ben, please make sure you send them in. Another player who there's a lot of rumours that he doesn't want to remain in Saudi, which is why I think the Henderson story is true. He's been linked with Arsenal. He's been linked with Man United. There's stories today in the UK that Benzema has been offered to Chelsea. What's your understanding of his situation, and how likely is he to join the West Londoners as a striker this January?
Well, some might sort of assume that Henderson catalyses a mass exit, but actually, and ironically, Henderson's departure might make it harder for Benzema, because it's common sense that the Saudi deal makers are not going to want a big exodus only 6 months in. And with only a couple of weeks left in the window, Benzema would really have to try and push. But the two situations are different, because Henderson's dealing with a smaller club and directly with the president, whereas with Benzema, were he to want to move away in the next 2 weeks, it would need ministry approval, it would need PIF approval, it would need direct green light from Gallardo, the manager, and Planes, the new sporting director, all on the same page. And if any one of those doesn't want it to happen, then Benzema will have to see out the season. But Benzema was brought to Al Ittihad because they were the Saudi champions. That's why they got the priority, and because they wanted him in the Club World Cup. So the fact the Club World Cup has now passed and Ittihad are struggling this season, they're not going to defend their title. They're not going to easily be able to guarantee anything regarding Asian Champions League. It's more likely than not, in fact, that they don't qualify this season for the Asian Champions League based on the table at the moment. So it again makes for quite a flat second half of the season. And therefore, Benzema may also feel like he wants to play at a higher level or in more competitive games over the course of the next 6 months. But it's a much harder one because it's one of the bigger clubs. So then you're dealing far more with the politics. And if any one of those key stakeholders within PIF and the ministry in particular, and directly within the club as well, have any pushback, it's a big, big problem. Now, obviously, when I say PIF and being wider than the club, PIF also control the club, but it's two different sets of people. You've got PIF and the ministry as wider deal makers thinking about the whole league. And then in addition to that, you've got those that actually are running Al Ittihad. So you need a green light from almost two sets of PIF people, the bigger picture PIF, and then in addition, the club specific PIF. Plus, as I say, your manager, your sporting director, and ultimately the Ministry of Sport. And I just think that the optics of a Benzema exit at this stage are not going to be a good look for the Saudi Pro League, to the point where sources say there's going to be pushback. I also think that Benzema's not doing what Henderson's doing. I know some people feel like he stayed in Mauritius and missed a Dubai training camp in order to try and facilitate an exit, but there was a cyclone there as well. And if the bad weather, as Benzema has now said, is the only reason why he missed that camp, then he'll return. So this notion of a Premier League move, I think, is premature. I'm told that he's not been offered to Chelsea despite links. Chelsea are still assessing their options. They might, it's true, want an older option that can be a stopgap and then they'll move in the summer. Or they might just stick with Amanda Broja and then let Nicholas Jackson come back from the Africa Cup of Nations. We also can't rule out them coming back in for Antonio Nusa either. So Chelsea had a recruitment meeting, I believe yesterday or the day before, and that was their second one in the space of just a few days. And Pochettino's gone off for a couple of days off. And I think the recruitment team's plan is to kind of lock in a singular target if they are to move for a striker in this window, because it won't be Victor Osimhen and it won't be Ivan Toney either. And Victor Gyökeres, who reports in Portugal suggested had been presented with an opportunity to join for about 85 million euros. That's got no legs to it as far as I'm told. Chelsea sources are very clear that they're not in for that particular player in this window. So again, we're going to have a lot of rumour about Benzema, but at the moment, I don't think, unlike Henderson, he's got a concrete offer that he can actually turn to, even if it is true that he wants to leave the Saudi Pro League. So any Benzema exit is going to be much, much harder than Henderson, especially because Henderson's gone. And when you consider that if there were politics around a Henderson departure that he was able to navigate, then times those politics by 1,000 for any possibility of Benzema being able to leave mid-season.
Which makes perfect sense. And as you say, until a concrete offer comes in from an Arsenal or a Chelsea or a Man United, it makes it even harder. Another player who is part of those stories this morning, two players that are linked to Chelsea via the media, are Mitrovic and Firmino, both, you know, big signings for the Saudi League, popular names from the Premier League. Is there any truth to those links to Chelsea? Have you heard that they've been offered to them, and are Chelsea tempted to bring in a striker of the ilk of those two?
Well, Firmino's been offered around. That's the big difference, that everyone thinks the players want to leave Saudi, and people are entitled to that opinion. But with Firmino, it's very different. Al Ahly actually want him loaned out. Whether or not they consider a permanent sale, sources are slightly less clear at this stage within the club. But a loan, absolutely. If the right offer is presented in the next 2 weeks or so, it's Al Ahly that want to loan Firmino, and then maybe assess a little bit further down the line whether or not they want to keep him or not. I think Firmino is probably done with the project. In the summer, at least, even if he's loaned, we'll consider a move away. And part of that is, again, down to not settling at Al Ahly, but more from a football perspective. I think he's okay with Saudi Arabia and enjoying Jeddah, but not enjoying playing for the team because the style from the manager, Matthias Jassel, doesn't really fit for him, and he spent a lot of time on the bench and he's failed to score goals. He got a hat-trick in his opening game, and then I don't think he's got on the score sheet in the league since then. So it hasn't worked out, and Al Ahly are actually the ones that want Firmino out, at least in a temporary manner. And then it may be because Al Ahly have got an incredible squad, and yet they're 13 points off the top. But when you just look at the 11 and the foreigners that they signed, with the likes, for example, of Riyad Mahrez as well, they should be doing much, much better. So maybe Jassel doesn't last. Maybe a new manager comes in. We know that Al Ahly have looked in the past at Jose Mourinho, and sources indicate if he is open to Saudi Arabia in the summer, that could be another possibility. And then if they loan Firmino, the situation can change and maybe he comes back. So there'll be a player narrative here and there'll be a club narrative, and maybe they'll be slightly different come the summer. But in the short term, everyone's on the same page. Firmino's open to a loan, maybe with an option or an obligation, and the club are open to a loan, but they're saying they still want to try and bring him back over the summer and then reassess. In terms of Chelsea and other clubs that have been linked, again, no direct approach at this stage, but it's absolutely true that Firmino is being offered around. Another club to look out for is Fulham, and I don't think that this would be right for Firmino, even though he wouldn't have to face the consequences of potential relegation if it was only a half-season loan. But Sheffield United had actually inquired and were one of the first clubs from the Premier League to have inquired when still Paul Heckingbottom was in charge. Now it's Chris Wilder. There may be slightly different perspectives, but you've definitely got 3 or 4 Premier League clubs. A return to Liverpool is being downplayed by sources. There's also some interest in Italy and in Turkey as well. So I think that Firmino will be one to watch between now and the end of the window, because if somebody can agree terms, then that can happen. But the terms also still require a very high expense as far as wages are concerned. So there's also interest from Steven Gerrard's Al Ittifaq, and in addition to that, Al Shabab. But both of those clubs have gone to Al Ahly and they've said, if we are to take the player, you, Al Ahly, need to pay 70 to 100% of the wages, because it's not within the budgets of those kind of clubs. Because again, they're not the big clubs. You're really looking at League One, low echelons of the Championship type budgets for these clubs. So they can't be affording to take someone onto their books at that kind of wage, not unless the parent club covers it. So that's why I think a move in the local Saudi market is unlikely. But I definitely think that Firmino, right until the last few minutes of the window, will be one to watch. And we definitely cannot rule out at this stage a return to the Premier League.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. There's a question here, actually, regarding Firmino for you, Ben, that says, would Firmino ruin his Liverpool legacy if he went to Chelsea? Do you think that would ruin the way Liverpool fans perceive him?
I don't think so. Liverpool fans love Firmino and they respect the fact that Firmino didn't prearrange anything. He decided he was going to leave Liverpool first with no option, and then he told Jurgen Klopp, and then he exited. So Firmino to Chelsea, I don't see that as legacy ruining. A few fans might not like it, but I think everyone loves to see Bobby Firmino playing with freedom and a smile on his face. And I think everyone wishes him success. And his relationship with the Liverpool fan base won't be tarnished, because he's not moved directly from Liverpool to Chelsea. He's gone to Saudi Arabia for a new challenge. Everyone wished him well with that. Everyone accepted his time at Liverpool was up. If now he has the opportunity to come back to the Premier League, I actually think there's a fair few Liverpool fans that would quite like to see him there. And the other thing is, to be perfectly truthful, if it's only 6 months, Liverpool fans don't need to worry about Chelsea. Maybe there's outrage if Chelsea were second in the table and Liverpool were still top of the table. But in the next 6 months, there is zero chance of Chelsea catching Liverpool, finishing above Liverpool, or significantly influencing Liverpool's season, other than the fact that they play once. And beyond that, and Firmino scoring against Liverpool in this very hypothetical situation, I think Liverpool fans won't mind significantly. I don't think Aubameyang's Arsenal legacy was tarnished by going Barcelona and then Chelsea either. But albeit Chelsea were way off and Aubameyang was barely playing and barely scoring. Maybe if Aubameyang had got 20 goals for Chelsea and they were, again, challenging Arsenal fans would have had more of a problem with it. But I think Liverpool are generally unconcerned by Chelsea at the moment. So if Firmino went there, I wouldn't expect a massive amount of outrage. But if you're a Liverpool fan in the chat and you disagree, then correct me with your opinion, because Liverpool fans will know better than I would, because they're the ones that will take more personal offence by that kind of move, potentially.
Of course, there is a comment that says, what about the Carabao Cup final? Well, what I'd say this, Chelsea got to get there first. Chelsea not even leading in that.
So do Liverpool as well.
Well, exactly. It's going to be great second legs. In relation to Chelsea, what are they doing at the moment in relation to bringing any additional players in? Because I know there's a lot of talk with profit and sustainability, but it's maybe the quietest January window I remember in recent times. It feels that all the big clubs are doing very little, but specifically with Chelsea, lack of experience in their team. Are they working on anything as far as you're aware, Ben?
They're working on stuff, but they've also spent a lot of money and they have to find the right targets. January is always an anomaly because it opens and it's such a fast window that everyone presumes it's going to be buy. But this is a window entirely framed towards the seller. And sometimes no good business is good business. And I think that we need to make that very clear. If your team is buying every single window, it exposes a shortcoming. And I think Liverpool fans understand that now. And if they're quiet in this window because they've done their midfield revamp and they're top, nobody really is too concerned, for example, that Liverpool maybe need another centre-back and they might not get one in this window. They might have to wait until the summer. I think with Chelsea, there's an expectation of, look at the league position, they need to fix it by buying. And I think within the recruitment team, they're thinking more that they're halfway through a 4-window plan. January's the 3rd window, the summer's the 4th window. So you don't want to move for the sake of it now if strategically the better names, the more significant long-term names are not available until summer. And that's why I think that Chelsea's number one priority is to find an elite level striker. And that will be summer. And that might be Victor Osimhen. They'll be in the race for that kind of target without doubt. But there's not much that can be done in January regarding him. Same for Ivan Toney. The expectation is that he'll stay at Brentford and then might go in the summer, but could also leave as a free agent in 2025 if a new contract is not agreed. And it's tough for Brentford there because the player wants about 200,000 a week and Brentford can't really offer that. And they don't know what league they're going to be in yet anyway next season. It's Toney's goals that are hopefully going to keep them clear of the relegation zone. So Chelsea see all of this and they understand that there's just not that many names available that are elite, that are proven, that can be dropped straight in. And if you can't buy better than what you've got, there's really no point. So this is probably leading to a lot of internal debate and quietness within the market. And in the last 2 weeks, Chelsea will sort of have to pull the trigger. So I would still expect them to seriously consider another source of goals because Nicholas Jackson's away at AFCON and Amanda Broja has some genuine interest by Wolves, although Chelsea sources downplay whether anything can happen in this window. It will only happen if they bring someone in first. And Christopher Nkunku has unfortunately had another injury setback. Had he not done so, Chelsea would have let him play 4 or 5 games in the build-up to the window, in the first week of the window, seen whether that made the difference, and it would have informed their decision. Now they have to make a decision without really seeing Nkunku, and as a consequence, it makes everything a lot harder. And again, it adds a little bit more time. So I don't think it's that Chelsea are not moving. I think it's Chelsea have to be able to bring in someone that actually improves the squad. And if they can't, then they won't buy at all. The other thing is that Chelsea have focused on outgoings. We've seen, obviously, Ian Maatsen go off to Dortmund on loan. Trevor Chalobah is a player that Chelsea would like to sell. And ideally, I'm told, because the Bayern move isn't a possibility that he wanted last summer, he would like to stay in the Premier League. And that can create a bit of income and give you a little bit of movement in the latter part of the window. The Conor Gallagher situation might be one of the stories of the window. Chelsea are not actively listing Gallagher, but for the right offer, they'll consider something. And then they also might have some funds to move in the market too. So it's not that Chelsea are not doing anything. It's just that you can't be reckless. And a success of a window is not just buying, it's buying the right name. And if you've got your squad in the right shape, you might not always need to even buy in a January window. And the example I sort of give is look at left back for Chelsea. And there's probably some mistakes here that would be acknowledged by the Chelsea ownership. You got Levi Colwill playing at left back, a very unpopular decision amongst the fan base. And when I was in America and I interviewed Pochettino, he told me Colwill was one of the best centre-backs in England, but he's playing left back. So that might be a stopgap, or it might be Pochettino as an inspired tactician knowing something that certainly I don't see and converting him to left back. Then you look at the other left back options and you've got Marc Cucurella, who they briefly tried to loan to Manchester United, but it wasn't possible. And then Cucurella ended up moving to right back and covering Reece James for a bit and doing quite well. You had Lewis Hall, who signed a new 6-year deal and then subsequently moved to Newcastle. And you got Maatsen, who in pre-season looked quite good in a more advanced position, but obviously is a left back and again, didn't get any game time at Chelsea. So if you decide, which is logical, that Colwill is eventually going to be centre-back, or you decide that because Maatsen's gone to Dortmund, you need a left-back in this market, and that is a possibility for Chelsea that they move for a full-back or a left-back in this market, they've got to be better than Maatsen. They've got to be better than Lewis Hall. They've got to allow Levi Colwill to go to centre-back, or they're only covering for Levi Colwill. And the player maybe won't want to move if they feel they're only going to be deputising Colwill. And then what about Ben Chilwell as well? So I think that is a good illustration of pick your name in the market if you think Chelsea should have moved for a left back. And tell me, is that left back going to be better than Lewis Hall, better than Ian Maatsen, better than Ben Chilwell, and better than Levi Colwill? And if they're not, then why did they let Lewis Hall go? Why did they loan out Maatsen? Why are they not using Colwill as centre-back? And why are they not trying the now fit Ben Chilwell at left-back? So it's like any new name needs to fit into that narrative and dynamic, or you've just bought somebody and everyone's going to be quite underwhelmed by it. And I think the Chelsea recruitment team will find the right names, or they won't sign at all.
And that's the right way to go. You can't just sign for the sake of signing. It has to be someone and especially Chelsea, there's elements of what they're doing that I think are right. But I look at the lack of experience in that team, and that's the biggest issue. That is literally it for me. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on in terms of them having to buy, the right individual. DJ here, one of our long-standing Chelsea members, has said, Terry, can you please ask Ben, is there any truth to the Colwill to Liverpool links, which I've seen online, and obviously Chelsea fans are a little concerned that he could go. Could you see Liverpool coming back in for him?
Yeah, I wrote something on this last week and also over the summer. Absolutely, he's on Liverpool's radar. It's irrelevant because Chelsea see Colwill as part of their leadership team. He's captained the team this season. Chelsea's stance is not for sale, but also Chelsea's stance is we wouldn't even put a price on it. So we're seeing a lot of reports about 70, 80, 90, 100 million, whatever the number is. Chelsea are not putting a number on it. It's a blanket automatic rejection. But Liverpool know that. So we're not talking about this window, and we're not probably talking about the summer. But the reason why he's on Liverpool's radar is because they've had this long-standing interest. They knew Liverpool from his time at Huddersfield, that Levi Colwill was an elite centre-back, and they've been tracking him ever since. So it's just about timing at this stage, and it's about exploiting the Chelsea narrative. Because if we get to the summer period and Colwill turns around to Pochettino and says, wait a minute, when I signed this new deal and chose not to consider Brighton as well at the time, you said to me in that one-on-one, this is Colwill to Pochettino, that I'm going to play centre-back. And then in pre-season, he played centre-back. And then the season starts and he's been predominantly left-back. Now, if that rumbles on and is not temporary, and Colwill doesn't like being converted to left-back, so that's the key point. Is this a stopgap?
Yes.
Or is this a long-term thing? If it rumbles on and Colwill doesn't like that, then of course Liverpool will come along and say, come and join us as centre-back in your best position. And I think that if Colwill was to miss out on the Euros squad because Southgate feels like he's not played the season at centre-back, then he might start to wonder whether the same pathways promised in the summer have actually been fulfilled. And he might start to wonder whether Chelsea are going to get him any European football in the next season or two. And that's when you start chipping away. So I sort of sense this might be one that is not feasible in 2024, unless the player in the summer was to really express an unhappiness. I think that it might be one more for 2025, but there's no doubt whatsoever that if Liverpool could get Colwill today, tomorrow, in the summer, next year, they would proceed as long as the terms were right for them, because they absolutely think the player is a fit, and they are positive that that is at centre-back, not left-back, like I think many Chelsea fans. And the last point to make on the situation regarding Levi Colwill is that when he played in the under-21 Euros for England and won that tournament and was outstanding, he was told after that tournament by Gareth Southgate that if he had a good season with Chelsea, not only was he in the mix for selection, but he was potentially in the mix for a starting spot. And at that point, obviously, Maguire's form was not brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a double whammy for Colwill in many ways, because he starts the season probably thinking he's got a real chance at the Euros with England and getting some minutes. And then halfway through the season, he's a left back and Maguire's had really good form. So there's the sort of double blow. And I still hope that Colwill goes in some capacity. And I think he still stands a very realistic chance. But obviously, he's not in his favoured position. And therefore, he's young enough to maybe be patient and think, I'll make a Euros one day, I'll make a World Cup. He's very much in the mix for 2026. Mm-hmm. But, you know, from Liverpool's point of view, they can't just make an offer for the sake of making an offer. You're wasting your window, you're wasting your time, because at this stage, Chelsea would just laugh that off. Chelsea would just auto-reject it. And I think even Colwill will give Chelsea far more time before he considers a move away. So it's one for Liverpool, which they always do, to work on in the long run, but he is absolutely still on their radar.
Yeah, as you say, I agree. I think it's one of those things. Right now, I wouldn't worry about it if I was a Chelsea fan, but if that prolonged playing at left back situation happens, the player becomes disgruntled, then yes, it's one to certainly look out for. Before we move on to a bit of Everton, a bit of Arsenal, a bit of Man United, because I know there's a bit of interlink in that, and I want to get your views. JC here says, Terry, could you ask Ben about the position of Poch at Chelsea? Are talks of Jose returning just a wild assumption? Because there are a lot of Chelsea fans online, Ben, that would like to see Jose come back. Is there any possibility Middlesbrough knocks Chelsea out of the Carabao Cup? Could you see a world where Poch goes and Jose returns to Chelsea?
No, I don't think so. I think Jose Mourinho will look elsewhere. I wouldn't rule out Jose, by the way, if he's a free agent and it doesn't go according to plan for Southgate. I wouldn't rule Jose out for England. I think international management will be one option. Saudi Arabia is another one. We already mentioned earlier in the show Al Ahly, and I think Al Nassr are the other ones looking. But a lot of these Saudi clubs have got relatively new managers, so it depends how cutthroat they want to be. But Mourinho had an offer from Saudi Arabia over the summer from Al Hilal, who are now top of the table and flying, so there's no possibility of him going back there. But there was an offer from Al Hilal for nearly 30 million a year for Mourinho. And Mourinho subsequently said that one day he feels he'll manage in Saudi. So Saudi for Mourinho, I think the sentimentalists and also those that like to connect dots based on Saudi links will say, what if Howe left Newcastle, which for me would be incredibly harsh. But what if Howe left Newcastle? Would Newcastle come in for Mourinho because of the PIF links? Then could he one day go on to Saudi from there? And it's a very neat narrative. And the sentimental aspect is Sir Bobby Robson, the mentor of Jose Mourinho, obviously an iconic figure at Newcastle. So it would be a very full circle kind of moment for Mourinho, and probably a role that he would consider as well. But again, Newcastle sources are downplaying that Eddie Howe is going to be culled at this stage because they sort of overperformed last season. And Howe's having to deal with a market where he can't move too freely because of financial fair play. And on top of that, they went out the Champions League, but it was a really difficult group. And maybe if Newcastle hadn't finished in the Champions League positions last season, if they were top half of the table and within 6 or 7 points of Europe halfway through the season, that might have been seen as progress, given that this ownership group took over when they were fighting relegation. So sometimes you can be a victim of your own success. Yeah. I say that as a Leicester fan. You know, we won the Premier League. We got to the quarterfinals of the Champions League the following season. 2 seasons on, under Brendan Rodgers, we were pushing for top 4 both seasons on the final day. And on the final day, it was in our hands, and Leicester fell out of a Champions League place on the final day. And the fan base started saying, oh, isn't that disappointing? And it's like, well, wait a minute. If you'd have said a few years back that Leicester would have 4 straight seasons where they would win a title, they would have Champions League, and then they would comfortably qualify for any form of European football, you'd have said that's dreamland and give the manager the biggest pay rise in the world and the keys to the city. But unfortunately, we're always just caught in that moment. So I think Newcastle fans now are questioning why last season hasn't yet been backed up. And that's leading to this notion that maybe PIF will be lured by a big name like a Mourinho and perhaps be cutthroat. And we're going to have to wait and see. But I think with Chelsea, Pochettino won't be judged until the summer. So was there to be any potential talk of Mourinho? It's not going to be a now thing. And I think that the expectation at Chelsea is still to stick with Pochettino rather than look to bring Mourinho back for a third time.
Which makes perfect sense. An interesting super chat here from Grey Wolfston. I hope you're well, my friend. He says, did you know Mourinho holds the record for winning the Premier League with the youngest average age squad? I didn't know that. It was in 2004-05, team which also broke records. I didn't know that. I'd love to know how young that was in comparative to today's sort of standards, and people talk about project use and everything else. So a great super chat there. I think the Jose thing's interesting for me. There's a lot of people that think he's still an elite world-class manager. He just needs the right team and setup. I think he's faded slightly. I still think he can win trophies. I still think he can do, I just don't know if, and I don't even know if it's about his style of football. I don't know whether there's a lot of managers that started managing the same time as Fergie, but Fergie carried on. And I think Fergie's biggest attribute to that was not just adapting styles of football, but it was how to handle the new generation of players. I don't know if Jose has adapted well enough to the fact that the Chelsea players used to call him daddy. I just don't see him having that affinity with players anymore. And it may not work, but some people still back him. We'll see what happens in relation to that one. I wanted to move on kind of to Arsenal, but it touches on Everton. We all know that Everton could be facing another points deduction. I wanted to ask you, if they are facing another points deduction, a lot of the stories coming out is they could face a fire sale this month and have to move players on. Arsenal have been linked with Onana. I read your piece via Give Me Sport the other day that Onana is open to that move. Could you see this deal taking place later this month if Everton are forced into a position because of more charges and points deductions from the Premier League?
Well, I think, first of all, the appeals process will give us more of a clue in February, and Everton are quite confident that the independent panel that hear their appeal will actually reduce the points deduction. And their argument is basically that there were interest payments on their new stadium that have been declared in the loss column, and the Premier League, they say, told them that interest payments would not be considered. And then they changed their mind, and the independent panel said that they had to be factored in. So Everton kind of believe that if they win that appeal in the first case, then there's overlap with the second set of charges, again, framed around interest payments that have taken them over the threshold. And if they can argue successfully that those interest payments should not be considered and there's a grey area in the rules, then the sale of Richarlison balances the books. And then Everton maintain that they'll be absolutely fine. So then they believe that they'll get their points back or less points deducted. Now, if that's the case, then they're in a slightly different position. So they can let this window shut, potentially wait until February and then assess their business in the summer when they know what division they're in and what the punishment is. So I don't see a fire sale in the next few weeks. I think with Onana in particular, the Arsenal interest is genuine, but it's nothing more than that at this stage. I'm not aware of any talks taking place between Arsenal and Everton for Onana. And even if Everton are to be, in some ways, financially motivated to try and bring in money, I still sense that it's out of Arsenal's budget in this window, because they paid 33 million for Onana to Lille, and the asking price would be at least 50 million, and some sources say 60 million. So even if you came down to 40 million, then that's still 40 million that Arsenal have to find, that they couldn't find to buy David Raya outright. And Everton will not be interested in doing some long-term deal structurally to the benefit of Arsenal. They'll be interested in either bringing in money if they are forced to sell, and there's denials at Everton's end that will be the case, or more importantly, they'll be valuing staying in the Premier League even in a season where they may be docked a bunch of points. And do they need the players they've got to do that? And what is it worth to them, even with a points deduction, to stay in the Premier League? And to do that, keeping Onana is probably more valuable until the summer versus selling him. So I think that Onana will leave in the summer, but I would be surprised if he goes in 2024.
Yeah, I hear you on that. In relation to Arsenal, again, a little bit like Chelsea, it feels very quiet. They're obviously looking at options and possibilities, but it does appear they're flying close to the wind on FFP or profit and sustainability more so. The Premier League are showing their teeth on that. What's your understanding of the latest goings on at Arsenal, and can they expect any incomings at this particular moment in time, Ben?
They can certainly strengthen, but I think someone will have to leave. And if, for example, they want a striker, then Eddie Nketiah would have to go first. And Arsenal prefer at the moment to keep Nketiah and then have that depth, because they believe that the right kind of striker they're looking for isn't available in this window. And that, to me, makes, I think, a lot more sense. But because it's the same point as we said with Chelsea. You don't just want to buy for the sake of buying. Otherwise, you end up spending the money and then not having the right name. So Arsenal could move for a forward, but only if the right name became available. And I still think that they may look very seriously at Ivan Toney in the summer, or even for free agency in 2025. But I think they're well aware they can't get him for under 100 million in this window. You've got Joshua Zirkzee as well, who's being looked at by a couple of clubs. Manchester United and Arsenal are the two that have maybe made the most serious kind of inquiries. And again, it looks like that's going to be one from Bologna that is more likely in the summer than in this window. I'm also told that the release clause that is widely reported for Zirkzee, which I think is 40 million euros, is only applicable to Bayern Munich. It's not something that a Premier League club can just activate. And again, it comes in the summer, not in January. And it's applicable to Bayern because they're the club that sold him to Bologna in 2022. It's unlikely that Bayern would look to trigger that clause because they only ultimately got rid of him year and a half ago, and they've got Harry Kane. But Eric Choupo-Maxim Moting could go, and that might be something that sort of frees up a little bit of space. Like Choupo-Moting was really good last season for Bayern, so that's another possibility, not for Arsenal but for Manchester United. But it may be that Bayern would like to persuade him to stay a bit longer, even at 34, for the kind of depth that he brings. But now Kane's come in, there's definitely a window of opportunity for like a player like him to go somewhere. So I think that there'll be inquiries for a few of these strikers, but I think that we're going to need a merry-go-round of movement first before anything happens in the last 2 weeks of the month. So if one goes, then a club needs a forward, and then they suddenly move for their forward, and you get a kind of flurry of activity. But if a lot of these names, Guerrecy's another one, he's at AFCON, he's got a release clause, Manchester United have considered him as well. If one big club moves for that type of name, then it might set in motion a sort of domino effect, and that's what we have to wait and see. But if it doesn't happen, then I don't think we'll see that many big name strikers or informed strikers on the move in January. I think alternatively, we will see maybe more a midfield plot line to end the window, a resolution one way or the other to the Conor Gallagher situation. And Calvin Phillips is another one that I'd be staggered if he doesn't go between now and the end of the window. And actually, I'm told that even though Newcastle have been linked consistently, they've never opened talks. We know Roy Hodgson has said that Crystal Palace are genuinely interested, but I would keep an eye on West Ham, because I'm told that at the moment, it may actually be West Ham United that are emerging as the front runner there. So I think Arsenal will be quiet. I think Liverpool will be quiet. I think Chelsea will move for one or two, a left back, maybe a striker. I think Tottenham will still look for a midfielder. I think that Calvin Phillips will be the big plot line as far as Premier League to Premier League transfer is concerned. And then we wait and see with some of these older players, like we've already discussed, the Benzemas, the Firminos, Henderson on the move to Ajax. But other than that, it might, unfortunately, for many that want it to be more exciting, prove to be quite an underwhelming window.
It certainly feels that way. It certainly feels that way. And maybe, as you stated already, if there is a Man United sign Gurassi as an example, and Arsenal think, oh, we better act. Or suddenly, if an Arsenal summer target, somebody looks to move for him now. So I'm pretty sure if somebody put a bid in for Ivan Toney, and that is a number one target for Arsenal in the summer, that could, make them look at their financial situation, borrow some money. I don't know what they would need to do, but there doesn't seem to be very much happening at all. Another player at Everton that's linked with a potential. I want to actually mention an Arsenal exit. Could Smith-Rowe be on his way to Villa? It's what a Villa 1982 has got to ask here. Could he be one of the exits that maybe raises some money for Arsenal?
Yeah, possibly, but I don't think they're looking to sell in order to buy at this stage. I think that they're genuinely just feeling like the right targets are not available. Smith-Rowe kind of divides opinion, because I think a lot of the Arsenal fans feel like he's come through their academy and they'd like to see him given more opportunities. But the Villa interest is genuine. It hasn't gone anywhere. And as a consequence, I think we can't rule that out. Arsenal might, as you say, have to move a couple of players, but there is interest in Toney from Turkey and Saudi Arabia. They could hypothetically cash in on Thomas Partey at some point in 2024. He also gets a lot off the wage bill as well, rather than only obviously bringing in a fee. So then that leaves the possibility that it wouldn't be reliant on Smith-Rowe. We've already mentioned Nketiah. If they find the right target, he can go as well. So I don't think it's a case of having to sell Smith-Rowe. I think it's a case of assessing it should an offer arrive, rather than actively, if you like, in inverted commas, transfer listing him. But I still think that there might be a twist with Smith-Rowe. The Villa interest hasn't gone away. We also know that Arsenal like Douglas Luiz. So is there any possibility of trying to do something where there's a two-way movement there? I think it's tough purely because Villa are flying. So even if they wanted Smith-Rowe, I would be staggered if they allow Douglas Luiz to go in this window. I'd also be surprised if Zubimendi is allowed to go to Arsenal, even if he wanted to. And there's no indication that he does at this stage, because Sociedad are doing really well. And I think he's quite settled and is enjoying his time there. So again, this outlines the challenge that if I was to list you the Arsenal targets right now, I would say Zubimendi and Luiz, 100% they would take them if they could. And I would say that they would probably move for Ivan Toney if the price was right, because he's exactly the kind of profile that they're looking for. So you've got three big targets there, and I wouldn't rule out two midfielders coming in. And then I think it's obvious that they want Toney out. Partey, I think they would consider. Smith-Rowe, I think they would consider. And Nketiah, I think they would consider. But that might all have to be something that they think about in the summer, because what's the point in allowing depth to leave, even if it's financially beneficial, if you can't replace in the next 2 weeks? Otherwise, all you've done is lose squad depth. And in doing so, if Arsenal end up fading, and there's such a fine margin now between winning the Premier League and finishing 5th or 6th, because it's really, really tight. And 5th is not 100% guaranteed Champions League football. So if Arsenal fade and somehow didn't get Champions League football, didn't sign Zubimendi, didn't sign Luiz, didn't sign Toney, etc., but let a Smith-Rowe or a Partey go, then the fan base is going to turn around and say, we've done it again. We've somehow finished the season with less depth than we started the season with. So I think Arsenal would have to line somebody up before they allowed that kind of transfer that you mentioned.
Yeah, Liz, I agree. I think that I understand Arsenal fans that say we're not doing enough. They say we're not buying enough. We're not doing enough now. I also understand a train of thought that I hear from other Gooners, which is, well, if our main target is not available into the summer, we shouldn't buy somebody who is substandard now just to sort of fulfill the fans. But at the same time, you end up finishing 5th or 6th this season because you didn't sign anybody or you let depth go. they've got to get this right, Arsenal, because at the moment their fan base is a bit of a tinderbox right now. It could go up at any moment with the way they're all feeling. Keeping it on the Everton theme, there are some stories again going around today of this fire sales. We know the answer around that, but Man United being linked with a move for Branthwaite, Real Madrid looking at him as well. He's had a tremendous season. Is that a deal that there's talk of Sir Jim coming in, and he's one of the names that's mentioned as a main target to bring in for Manchester United, more so in the summer. Is that something you're hearing?
Yeah, definitely a target. And again, Ratcliffe is not in yet. So this will be something for the summer, I think, rather than now. Manchester United might surprise us with a little bit of late opportunism, but I do think that we have to understand that Manchester United have an approved, what's formally known as transfers plan. And if they deviate from that, it has to be run by effectively Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos. So it would be a change of approach if they are to try and move early. And it's a shame really for Everton, because the player himself was really very keen to try and commit to Everton. And then due to circumstance and I suppose the kind of reality of where we're at right now, it's kind of changed. So there's some sort of opportunism there. But let's wait and see.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by it. I mean, I'm liking a lot of what I'm hearing from Sir Jim in terms, again, it's words at the moment around, we're not here for money. We're here to get Man United back to the top. The four main positions that they're looking at, another goal scorer, bolstering the midfield, a right back and a centre back. And they're the four main areas that we need to improve. And if he was to go out and really do well and improve those core positions at the club, start reducing the debt, investing, we know he's going to invest 300 million euros of his own money. It's a good way to start and begin. I want us to sign players now at Man United as a United fan, but equally, until we actually get all our feet under the table, the new board in, the new CEO in, the sporting director in, decide what we're doing regarding our manager, I think it is a little bit too premature to start investing big money on players, because until everything's set in stone, we know what type of player for the style of football we want as a club, what coaches we need to make that happen. You don't want to drop £80 million on a player. I'm not saying Branthwaite would cost that much, but you don't want to drop £80 million on a player and then your new recruitment team go, he's not really the profile for what we're deciding to play. So it feels like we're sort of between a rock and a hard place right now at Manchester United with everything that's going on. But if Sir Jim is true to his word, it could be a very exciting time in the summer for Manchester United in terms of incoming at board level that we need, football decision makers coming in, plus some real stellar opportunities in the transfer market for us to really rejuvenate this squad.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, again, Manchester United just have to wait, because you can't buy before you've got a strategy, not to any great degree. And you can't buy because of financial constraints, and you can't buy because not all the right targets are available. So it sounds a bit like a broken record, but January is not about the buyer always. It's about availability in the market. It's about price. It's about circumstance. It's about opportunism. So it's not an easy window, and recruitment teams shouldn't always be judged on January, because they don't always have that ability. And that's why you either line up your deals early and get them done and they're announced in that first week, or you move late in the window because you're using the window to see the market movement and who's available. So Manchester United are able to send Sancho to Dortmund, just as one example. And that gets the wages covered. And that might mean that they've got wage space now to move for somebody else. But I think this window has been about Manchester United being damaged by the fact that the takeover that the hope would be done in the summer was actually announced just before the window and is being completed just after the window. So if it was done in the summer, you might have a sporting director, you might have a new recruitment team, you might have had a transitional period, you'd have certainly done the strategic review. And as a consequence, Ten Hag would have been judged, and the new Ineos team would have bedded in and been able to influence January, which was always the plan back in kind of February or April. Whereas now their first window they can significantly influence is the summer. And the last thing they want to do is spend bad money and then be able to spend less in the summer. Or the last thing they want to do is react to a football problem before they've considered the strategic solution to it. And this is, again, why they're not going to rush on anything. The major appointments or signings, if you like, will start at executive level at Manchester United and then eventually in the summer filter down to football decisions. If you do it the other way, you're doing it backwards. It's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. Ben, I know you've got to shoot. You've got to be somewhere else. I really appreciate you coming on, my old mate, and we'll speak again soon.
I look forward to it. Have a good day, everyone. All the best.
Cheers, Ben. Thank you very much indeed. Listen, everyone who's tuned in, I want to thank you all. But as you all know, we're sponsored by Stake and their F1 team today. If you don't know what this is all about, if you're a Formula One fan, you probably already do. Take a quick look at this.
Guess who just took the wheel? We did. The Stake F1 team era is here. Buckle up.
So we know it's a transfer window in football. Teams get the opportunity to shake things up, and that's exactly what Stake have done here. Of course, voiceover by Drake, absolutely amazing. They have taken over from Alfa Romeo in Formula One, and they want to revolutionize what is going on within that sport. You can check it all out now, everything they're doing generally in the F1 arena, what they're showcasing right now on their website. There's a link in our description, in our live comment section, or you can scan that QR code right there. Please get that done, people. If you're not someone who watches F1 either, by the way, and I've only recently started watching it again, I watched it more when I was a kid, get involved. And Stake, listen, they're the ones. They're the ones right now. Listen, you ain't getting Drake doing your voiceovers if you ain't special. You ain't bringing him in if you ain't trying to do something big. So go and check that out right now, my people. Give that a scan. Give that a little look. Everyone who's tuned in today, I want to say a big thank you to each and every single one of you. It's always very, very humbling that so many of you tune in, so many of you watch, so many of you subscribe each and every single day. Until next time, take care, goodbye, God bless, and I'll see you all again soon.